Be sure to subscribe to the channel to get more news like this from TLDR, and all of our other channels are linked down below. A mystery illness, hard to detect with an unknown cause. Nope, we're not talking about COVID, but something targeting a much smaller group of people. American diplomats. An illness known as Havana syndrome. So let's take a look at what Havana syndrome even is, and why it's back in the news right now. To properly understand what Havana syndrome is, we need to go to, Havana, Cuba. First witnessed back in 2016, the syndrome consists of a weird set of symptoms, from the sound of grinding metal and piercing squeals to a low hum and intense pressure on the skull. But the especially odd thing is that it seems to only affect American diplomats and intelligence personnel. Initially, the first cases were CIA officers, and the syndrome was kept on the down low. Publicly declaring a mystery illness affecting US personnel abroad would have been a national security risk and potentially cause chaos. Eventually, however, people began to find out, and more people in the US Embassy in Havana succumbed to the syndrome. So it became increasingly difficult to keep a lid on things, and it also became harder and harder just to run the embassy itself. Just 2 years after restoring diplomatic relations, in 2017, the embassy was vastly scaled down due to fears for the American personnel's health. By June of the next year, just 10 diplomats remained on the ground in the embassy, the bare minimum needed to perform the core diplomatic and consular functions. But what was causing it? Was it a weird form of travel sickness, a psychological illness, or something more sinister? Because when you have a mystery illness with no clear cause that affects a sensitive group of people on hostile soil, well, it's safe to say that it was a breeding ground for conspiracies, and competing theories soon developed. Given the lack of love between the American and Cuban administrations, people were very quick to point their fingers at the involvement of the Cuban government in all of this, but nothing could ever be confirmed. Fast forward a few years though, and cases began to emerge left, right and centre. In May, CNN reported that 2 officials on the National Security Council were struck by the syndrome towards the tail end of 2020. The first occurred just after the 2020 election, as the NSC official was attempting to pass through an unstaffed gate near the ellipse, with the second happening a few weeks later near the entrance to the White House grounds. While the first reported only mild symptoms, the second was serious enough to warrant immediate medical treatment. Then in September, it was reported that the CIA had removed its station chief in Vienna for not responding appropriately to an outbreak of the syndrome. The Washington Post pointed towards there being more cases in Vienna than anywhere else in the world, barring Havana itself. Just a week later, police in Berlin announced that they'd begun a formal probe into an alleged sonic weapon attack on employees of the US Embassy, after, you guessed it, staff at the embassy began reporting symptoms of the Havana syndrome. This itself coming after a CIA officer travelling with the agency's director and another American official travelling with Vice President Kamala Harris also reported symptoms of the syndrome. Which, again, begs the question, what's causing it? Well, back in 2020, the US National Academy of Sciences tried to get at the bottom of it. While the committee tasked with the job faced several challenges in assessing the cases, including a lack of access to individual level health, evolving and changing clinical features over time, and a highly heterogeneous population, they did conclude that directed pulsed radio frequency energy appears to be the most plausible mechanism in explaining the cases the committee had access to, with the committee all but ruling out any sort of poisoning or wider psychological cause. The committee also held back on naming any particular suspects, but according to anonymous press sources, there's consensus among the intelligence community that a Russian spy agency, the GRU, are the most likely culprits. The GRU are basically known for performing risky international operations, including Moscow's annexation of Crimea and numerous cyber attacks across the West. The US already found the GRU responsible for interfering in the 2016 and 2018 election through cyber attacks and other means. And interestingly, the GRU also have a known presence in Cuba, Vienna, and the US, where Havana syndrome has popped up. Regardless though, whoever's behind Havana syndrome has to have serious resources, be willing to take risks, and have some sort of feud with the US since 2016. And the GRU are apparently the only group which fits all of the criteria. Anyway, following the incidents with the Vice President and CIA Director, the US Director of National Intelligence ordered a wide-ranging investigation into the attacks, including a 100-day probe into potential sources. And while it's set to conclude towards the end of this year, a CIA spokesperson talking to CNN poured cold water on any public revelations, saying that we don't comment on specific incidents or officers. We have protocols in place for when individuals report possible anomalous health incidents, with two sources going on to tell CNN that no public report was planned. So we might not see their findings. In light of these attacks, 10 senators introduced a bill to directly support the victims of the syndrome who had otherwise fallen through the cracks. The Helping American Victims Affected by Neurological Attacks, or Havana Act, which was passed unanimously by the Senate back in July and signed into law by the President last week. A move that, while undoubtedly welcome, is unlikely to bring peace of mind to American diplomats and intelligence personnel in all four corners of the world. Anyway, as a last thing, expect a serious political spat when the culprits of the Havana syndrome are identified, if they ever are. Targeting non-military American personnel on American land really isn't something the US government is going to take lightly, and, fair enough. But what do you think? What's at the heart of the Havana syndrome? Is this the start of a new age of warfare? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description.